everyone, and welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a channel dedicated 100% to adult survivors of child sexual abuse here in New Zealand and out across the world. We have terrible statistics about this, and the silence is deafening. And I happen to know that this is true in other countries as well. So I'm doing my little part, team, to try and get some focus so that beautiful survivors like you can get the support that you need. So just before I introduce my next guest, I just wanted to advise a trigger warning. If for any reason you feel triggered watching this, please go to the show notes below and you'll be directed for some help and resource. So in the meantime, I'm smiling because I've been talking to our next guest about not touching the computer. So I'd like to introduce you to Paulie Stevens, and he will get to speak, I promise. And he's amazing. I caught him on the Sean Atwood show, and what he had to say, I just felt really humbled by, and his presence today will certainly help others. So let me tell you a few things about Paulie. He's obviously a survivor. He's got a story to share. He also wrote a book called You Can't Hurt Me, which he will talk to us about a bit later on the show. And he wrote that in 2012. In 2014, the police removed it. Have we got your attention yet? So he will tell us a little bit about that. He's also an advocate, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Paulie Stevens. Good morning or good evening.
Good evening.
How are you doing, Paulie?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, real good. Real good.
Good. Thank you for agreeing to come on this very small channel, which helps a lot of people. So really appreciate your generosity.
That's my pleasure, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay.
So look, you're a survivor. Be good for the audience to understand a little of what you experienced, simply so that something you may say may just resonate or speak to another survivor and give them permission to feel less alone or less unsupported, if that's even a thing. So Paulie, how old were you when the abuse first began?
I was 11 when the abuse started. I was about 8 when I first met this gentleman. So the grooming process to get my trust was over probably 2 or 3 years that I actually knew him. And because of my life and because of the way I grew up, I didn't trust anybody, very few people. So for him, he must have known that because he lived above a very good friend of mine that I used to go to school with every day. And so that's how I got to know him. And yeah, he very, very slowly got my trust. So the grooming process, which obviously I didn't understand at the time, and there was only, as I say, 1 or 2 people that I really trusted at that time, because of why I grew up as a child. My mother was very violent and abusive towards me, as many partners were. So in and out of children's homes and stuff growing up in South London. So to trust people, because as soon as I trusted someone, I always got let down. So as I got older, I trusted very, very few people. But when I met Nigel, I didn't trust him at first, I'll tell you the truth. But as time went by, he was, basically I was doing little odd jobs for him. So, and I had nothing as a child, nothing, so for him to give me little bits of money, so that's how he, that's how he got close to me. So yeah, I'd say for 2 or 3 years, the grooming process started. So once, I sort of thought he was a real friend. then he would offer me more jobs here and there and take me in his car, and so up to probably, but when I was just about probably just 11, that's when touchy feely sort of started with him. He would play wrestling games with me and ask me who my favourite wrestlers were, and I still didn't understand. You know what I mean? It was something that I wasn't used to, but because we would, especially in children's homes, we would watch wrestling on a Saturday afternoon, and you know what I mean, and we would always play wrestling and stuff and care that I thought that, I didn't think too much. And to be looking back at it now, of course I wouldn't think too much. So I didn't grasp what he was doing. You know what I mean?
So I'm just going to take you back a little. When you talk about growing up with your mum and that you ended up in state homes, were you were you the only child in your family? Was what happened to Dad? Like, was there a I guess, just if you're comfortable, what kind of is the backstory with that?
Well, my mother was 15 when she had my sister, and she was 16 when she had me, so she was very, very young. I don't know a lot about her early life, but I do know that her mother was not very nice, not a nice person. So, in this situation, my mum followed on from her mum. So, pregnant, met my dad at 15, had a whirlwind romance of about 3 weeks, I should think. Got pregnant within no time at all. Had my sister when she was 15 and a half, 16. And then my dad then got pregnant virtually straight away again. This time, back in them days, the council housed her in a big high-rise tower block in South London, and she got pregnant again. So my dad then, they didn't at that time, I'd never met my dad. He disappeared, so he never came back. So that was that. So then my mum being so young, she couldn't cope with everyday life, I don't think, what I'm led to understand. So, and because I found out later on, because later, my first book, this book that I wrote, I talk about it quite openly. And when I was 16, and as I say, backwards and forwards to my mother's, we had a terrible, we didn't have a fight because I would never hit her, but she quite readily would use whatever she had. And this particular day, we had she attacked me terribly, actually, with a pool cue. And I lost my temper and just screamed at her why. I wanted to know why. And she, for the first time in my life, she told me the truth, because she said, excuse the French, I don't mean to be rude, but she said, you're like your fucking father. You look like him, you act like him, and that's why I hate you. So I was just like, well, at least I know the truth now. You know what I mean? So that was the last time I ever spoke to her. I was just 16, so that I never ever spoke to her again after that, because I knew the truth. You know what I mean? But so that was my upbringing from the earliest of ages. She wasn't a very nice person. No. Again, I said she had the reason she done what she done. You know what I mean? And but my sister, on the other hand, she adored, absolutely loved her to death. So it wasn't the more the violence I could cope with, because people used to say to me when I first wrote my first book, and we had a book opening, and we had a book launch at a big store in London, and this woman said to me, she'd read my book online, and she said, "How are you so strong?" She said, "Like, I don't understand after everything you went through." And I said, "It's quite easy." I said, because this is how I explain it to people when it's the truth, that if you grow up in a loving family and you get to 10 years old and your family die in a car crash and you go into care, and then you're fostered out to a very violent family, and all of a sudden violence is a part of your life, you couldn't cope with it because you're used to certain things. But I wasn't. As I said to this lady, I wasn't born with a smack on the arse. I was born with a smack in the mouth. So if you are used to it from the earliest of ages, you just get used to it. It's a part of life. So for me growing up, a good hiding was just like a good hiding. Do you know what I mean? So, but what it done is it made me not trust anybody. It wasn't just my mother; it was her various partners. You know what I mean? That abused us as well. So when Nigel came, when Nigel came along, I didn't trust him at first. but I grew to trust him, and that's what was the worst bit for me.
Well, he made sure that you did. So he was a grade A groomer, just from what I understood. Paulie, I guess for you, knowing all that, seems like there weren't safe adults around you. Was there anyone in your life at the age of 11? Well, he started grooming you at 8, and then the abuse culminated at the age of 11. But was there any safe adult around you at all?
Well, yeah, there was one chap that I used to work with. Obviously, being in New Zealand, you probably would remember or know. In London, in the old days, say in the 70s, they not a lot of people had central heating, so they'd have paraffin heaters, which is like gas oil. So we used to have an oil round every weekend, and the local oil man would, and he employed me just as a kid, but he loved me. His name was. Well, I say his name was Harry, because in the court case I had to name him as Harry, and in the book I called him Harry, but his name wasn't Harry. But that doesn't matter. He was a lovely, lovely, lovely man, and that's one man I did trust, and I really did trust him. He was from the earliest of kids. He gave me a job with him at the weekend where I would go and fill up the cans. Knock on the door, they fill your can, give me the can, I'd fill it up with oil and take it back to him. And I learned from him a lot, not just about the work ethic that I still have to this day, but more the fact that he was a decent human being, and it sort of showed me that there was a better way than because I could have grown up the way my mother grew up, and I could have been wayward. I could have ended up in prison. I could have done all the things that I grew. The area I grew up in was a very violent South London estate, so I could have grown up that way. But meeting Harry as a youngster showed me the way that I wanted to grow up. I didn't want to be what my mum was saying I was. She would call me Eustace. And so Harry was a mentor, but I didn't realise it at the time, but I absolutely loved him, adored him. He was a lovely man.
Yeah. And in a way, being able to identify with a positive male in your life would have, in a way, helped save it, I imagine. When you think about, so talk us through, if you can, what happened when Nigel had been grooming you. You look back and you see it so clearly now, and aren't they clever the way they do this, Paulie? But look, he did it, and then you got to crunch time when it wasn't just grooming, it actually became the sexual abuse. How did you manage to get away? Were you, was it just a situation you were in one time, or did it continue? How were you able to remove yourself at age?
What happened was, as I say, for a few months he was sort of a bit touchy-feely. He'd grab hold of me wrestling and stuff. When I was working with him, he'd come up behind me and grab me and sort of cuddle me, and it's something that I just got used to over time with him. It wasn't like it was a little one-off. It was been going on for a few months. So, and my athletics coach, because I was a very, very good athlete, and my athletics coach was the only other person that would if I won a race, I was a very exceptionally good athlete. I was the best athlete in the south of England for a long time as a youngster. And so my coach was the only person that I ever trusted that would give me a cuddle. My mum never cuddled me, and no one ever cuddled me. No one was ever in that respect. So for my coach and he used to squeeze my shoulders. He wasn't touchy feeling, but he would squeeze and it was the way that he would show me affection because he was so very proud of me. So when Nigel started doing the same, I didn't, even though he was a little bit more forceful, I didn't put two and two together. Do you know what I mean? It was only when we was wrestling on. Well, we used to go and get my little bit of money off him on a Thursday, and it was summertime, and I'd been training with my club, and I'd gone round to his apartment to get my little bit of money, and he started wrestling with me again on the bed, and then he got a bit rough this time, a little bit too heavy, so I was a bit troubled. So I got off the bed and I went to the corner of the bed, and he told me to take my top off, and to this day I don't know why I did, but I did. And I took my vest off. I'm standing in just my shorts, and because, as I said in court and stuff, I was I was a very, very talented athlete. So I would train like you couldn't even begin to imagine. I was so fit for 11. I was quite a big boy for 11, but I was also very, very toned and very muscular. So I took my top off, and then he stood there for a second, and I felt stupid. You know what I mean? So I was just about to put my top on, and he was like, "Right, take your shorts off." And I said, "Nah." I said, "No, what do I want to take my shorts off? Do I?" No, yeah. I said, "No, no, no." And I grabbed my top, and I said, "I've got to go. See you later." And I shot off. So you know, even though it was overstepping the boundaries, I still didn't, even at 11 years old, and I was proper streetwise, trust me. You know, I was a proper little urchin. I would be out for 12 hours a day. My mum would never know where I was. I was always up to mischief and always, you know what I mean, making money the best way I could because I had nothing. So I soon learned, you know, that, you know, the street way, how to, you know, I was a street urchin, that's what I was. But I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't put two and two together. But it was the draw of the money. He was giving me more and more money, and because I was just, you know, I had nothing as a kid, you know, and I wanted to have the things that the other kids had, but I didn't, you know what I mean? So I still, even though I knew it was strange, and it haunts me to this day. I'm not going to lie to you, it haunts me to this day that I still went back, and I still didn't. Did I put two and two together?
No. Okay, so I'm going to stop you there because our audience will relate to this as well. Paul, in that scenario, over those 3 years, you had an adult who definitely had power over. Whether you knew it at the time or not, he had the power. You were always the child, and even if you were to see him again today, you can still feel small and vulnerable because the body never forgets, yeah? But the point is this, as the child, and you say to this day, I still, you know, struggle with it. The point is this, you were the child and you were also trying to survive. That money was life-saving to you in some ways. So you can't, I don't think there's any room for you to have self-blame. And I know it's really hard for us as survivors because we do carry that. But the point is, you don't deserve it. Give it back. Hand the shame back. What's this channel? Handing the shame back. Hand the shame back. Paulie never belonged to you. This doesn't belong to you. You were a child, man. He was a...
I know that now, and I didn't up to like 18 months into the investigation. You've got to remember that the investigation into Nigel Clayton took nearly 6 years, and they uncovered. Excuse me, I just got to move this back a little bit. I apologise. So no, so because the investigation went on for so long, I didn't cope with it very well, to be truthful, because I put it to the back of my mind, but I never ever addressed it ever. It's only when I wrote this book, I wasn't ready, and I didn't write this book as a book. I wrote it as memoirs. So a friend of mine read it and said, "You got to publish this. This is just amazing." And I was like, "No," I said, "No chance." You know what I mean? But anyway, long story short, it did get published, and that's when all the trouble started, because someone had read the book, and Murder Squad had phoned me and said, like, "Who's the person in your book?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And there's like chapter 5, and basically they was investigating the disappearance of a lad in London that disappeared many years ago. They, you know, they feel he was taken. There's no proof because they never found him. They don't know where he is. So I can't say he's been taken. They know he's been taken, but I can't say he's been murdered because no one ever found him. They feel he's been killed, and they feel that obviously the police, you know, put two and two together, and they, you know, they wanted to know. They've interviewed 2,000 known paedophiles, and they were no nearer to breaking the case. So they just said, if you can give me the person in your book, we can interview him, because they're still trying to find this young boy, bless him. You know what I mean? So that's how it all started, and then, you know, and that completely opened a can of worms for me, because I wasn't ready for it, and I said no, I didn't want to do that. You know, I didn't want to address it. I put it to the back of my mind since I wasn't believed. Like, in 1977, I wasn't believed. The police, it was reported to the police by Harry, because he was the only person that was close to me, and he knew something was troubling me. Do you know what I mean? So it was reported in 1977, and the police did interview me. But back in them days, nothing was ever done about it. Nothing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you only have to look at Jimmy Savile. You know, back in the 70s, 60s, and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, he was never believed. Even 90s is still going on, and no one ever believed you. Do you know? I mean, you know, all the survivors that are watching this will know the same. You know, 80% of them you're not believed. Even if it's reported, no one ever believes you. I think you're making it up. You know what I mean? So you know, so for me, I wasn't ready for this. All of a sudden, it was out the blue. Could you give us the name of this person? And I was like, nah. I said, actually, I don't know his name. All I knew his name was Nigel. I said, I can't tell you no more, because after he done what he did to me, you know, once this, you know, the abuse, you know, the sexual abuse, which was horrendous, there was no way, and I got out by the skin of my teeth. I tell you the truth, there was no way, and I said this in court. There's no way he was going to let me go. I know that now. Looking back at it, at the time, you know, it's horrific, and you know, looking back, he was never going to let me go. No. Never. He would have killed me.
No.
He would have definitely killed me.
So your friend Harry, who you'd confided in, went to the police and told them what happened. Tell us what happened. You got back to your house and you were completely blindsided because the police turned up, or you turned up?
Yeah, no. I got in from school one day, about 3 weeks after this had happened, and Harry had asked me probably a week before, what is the matter with you? Paulie, saying all right with you? And I said, no. He said, is your mum giving you grief again? So I would regularly go to work with bruises. Do you know what I mean? Where she, you know, I'd get a good idea off of her, one of her fellas or whatever. And I said, no, I can't talk about it. And he kept on. What can't you talk about? I said, if I tell you, he'll kill me. If you threaten to kill me. And he said, he will kill you. And I was just like, oh, I don't believe it. I've let it out of the bag. So he made me, and he kept on and on for hours. So in the end, I told him what had happened, and I made him promise. I said, Harry, promise you won't tell. I called him Harry. It wasn't Harry, but anyway, you won't tell. You please. He will kill me if you tell him. If you tell anybody, you'll kill me. No, he promised me he wouldn't tell anybody. So I thought, at least my secret's safe. You know what I mean? And but he did tell somebody. It was only because when the police, I walked in from school and there's a policeman sitting there, and my mum has got a face like thunder, because you could never go against my mum. And this policeman wants to have a word with you. The police wants to have a word with you. And I was like, okay. So I said to the policeman, can I talk to you on your own? You know. But my mum weren't, she wasn't going to have that. She's like, what have you been up to? You need to talk to him now. I'm not going to swear on, but she was pretty, So anyway, I said to the policeman, asked me, I said, right, I thought I was in trouble. I thought I'd been caught doing something that, I was getting up to mischief or something. But no, he said, I understand. We've been led to believe that we've had a report that someone's interfered with you. Can you tell us what's happened? And I was just like, how does he know? My mind was scrambled for a minute, and I wanted to talk to him on his own, but she wouldn't let me. So then I had to tell him. I couldn't tell him all the details. I never even told everybody everything. What I write in my book is only a small part, because you lose your dignity. You know what I mean? Being a survivor, and all of the survivors that are watching this, your dignity. Well, you haven't got any left. It strips you of every ounce of dignity that you've got in your body when someone does, and because you're not ready for it. I mean, I was just, I was never ever the same after what he'd done. You know what I mean? So, so the police asked me these questions. I gave them a little bit of detail, but not a lot. And of course, that was that. He'd be in touch. That was it. He never got in touch. They never believed me. Sorry, I apologise. The screen's moving. I'm just going to move this again. They didn't believe me then, and I just put it to the back of my mind. I just had to carry on. That was it. That was the end of it.
So your mum, her response when the police were asking you questions, you were telling them as much as you safely could. What was her response about all of this towards you?
Well, once the police officer left, once the police officer left, my mum was pretty, yeah, she was adamant I was lying, and what's been going on, I won't swear because every other word that she said was a swear word, and I just lost my temper with her, which you could never ever do to my mum. You could never stand up to her. You could never tell her what was really on your mind. I mean, honestly, she was the most violent person you'd probably ever want to meet, and if you met her, she was 45 kilos wet. She was a tiny, slim, beautiful lady. My mum was very, very beautiful, but she's just had an evil temper. So I'm trying to say to her, look, in the end, I lost my temper, which you could never do. You can't lose your temper with my mum. And I swore at her. She said he had fucking sex with me. And I just kept saying, ask Alison's mum. She lived below Nigel. Ask her. She'll tell you. She'll tell you I've been working there. Because my mum didn't believe a word I said. It was all made up. It was like, and the only person you want in your life at that point would be, if your mum don't believe you, what you got? You ain't got nothing. And she did not believe me. So I ended up having actually having I was pretty handy at 11 years old. I could look after myself. I was a big boy, so I hated her husband. 1, 2, 3, fourth husband was a nasty piece of work as well. So we ended up having a fight, and then consequently, my social worker was called. Well, I ran away, to be honest, and I went and spent the night at my social worker, and I went back into care for a while, and then I moved back to my mum's. I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months later, and then just put it to the back of my mind because I had to.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there because you're raising some really valid points, I think, that will help our survivors watching. I guess one of the things is this, that your wonderful friend Harry is concerned enough to take it further, believing he's doing the right thing. You then end up in a situation where you're trying to be honest and share your truth, but it doesn't really suit the narrative, doesn't suit your mum to actually have that, because then she would need to take responsibility or take some kind of action, as in supporting you or trying to keep you safe. And it doesn't sound like either of those two things were possible. So that happened. Then when you share with the police, they say all the right words, but nothing happens. And unfortunately, you're talking the talk of Survivorland. So for our beautiful audience watching, there are so many of us out there, Paulie, who just don't get believed. We get rejected, we get made bad, we get turned into the abuser ourselves, because no one wants to believe it. So therefore, why are we causing trouble? Whereas you and I both know, if we backtrack and spin it on its head and simply ask, what happened to you as a child, or what's happening? Can you imagine the space then to feel you could be truthful and that you would be believed? So again, why on earth would trust ever feature in your life again? But I know for you that it did. So I'd love you to talk us through. You had the wonderful Harry in your life, bless, and you also had this amazing coach. Can you tell us a little bit about how he saved you as well? You had a couple of heroes in your life, Paulie. Tell us a bit about.
Yeah, no. I first met my coach. I'll go back to when I probably went to the roughest school on the manor, and I played, but we never had sports field near our school. It was about a mile away, so we'd have to run to our football pitch, and we would run back, and I had to win everything. My mum telling me I was useless and I was never materialised into anything. That just drove me to be the best at everything. And I don't know where I get it. Well, I do know where I get it from. That's where I get it from. I have to win everything. I don't like losing. So we was invited one day to a prestigious cross country race, which was run by a private school called Collingwood. And for our school to be invited to run this cross-country meeting was like a big, very prestigious for us. So we, the team was picked, first ball to the football pitch, got picked, that was it. Well, I always won. So I was first in the team. So we turned up on this afternoon to this cross-country meeting, and I write about it in the book. It's actually quite funny. You can imagine we didn't have spikes, we didn't have athletics kit. We had a football kit. That's all we had. So we turned up at this cross-country meeting in a football kit, football boot, and we are racing the top schools in the biggest private schools in the south of England. Eton, Collingwood. I mean, names you wouldn't know, but big schools. And we turned up in the proper little Herbert who were in our football kit. So, and my football coach said to me, "You might be the quickest at school, but you will never win this race. You've got some of the best boys in the south of England." There was 400 kids in this race. And as I said, when I wrote it in the book, I looked at all these posh kids, and I had all the spikes and all the track suits and everything. And we looked like, honestly, I describe myself as Huckleberry Finn. We looked like proper little urchins, trust me. And I said, and I looked at these kids and I thought, of course I can beat them. We talked about, of course I can win this race. There's no one here that's going to beat me. I looked at them and I thought, no chance, absolutely. Because as I said in the other podcast, I would run to school. I was 4 miles from my school when I was in the children's home, making us bus money. So I would run to school and we would play penny up the wall with the bus money, and I would treble it. I'd make lots of money because I was good at it. And then I'd run back again. So to me, to run 8 miles a day was simple. And this was only a 3-mile cross-country race. So the gun went off, and of course, me being me, I went straight to the front. And I won, absolutely annihilated these kids. And the funniest thing is the teacher said to us, "When you're finished, you can go straight home." So I thought, that's handy. We can finish at 2 o'clock. We don't finish school till 3:30, 4. So I didn't stop. I ran through the finish line, and I didn't stop. I ran through the finish line, went straight to the changing room, got changed and shot off. I didn't even. So I've won the biggest race in the south of England, and I didn't even wait to get my trophy. Can you imagine, can't you? Can you imagine the embarrassment for my school teacher? It was, anyway.
You didn't realise there would be a trophy at the end.
I didn't have a clue. I just thought, oh, well, I've won it. I'm off. See you later. So yeah, that's the truth. So the next morning I got to school and they called me up onto the stage, and I thought I was in trouble again because I was always in trouble. And I'm thinking, oh no, and we had 1,000 kids in our school, so I've had to march onto this stage, and he's given me this biggest trophy and this big medal, saying like, if you'd hung around, you could, Anyway, that's that. So then about a week later, after I'd won this race, my coach came to my school, a guy from Terry Knight. He was the loveliest man, beautiful person. And he, and I was called to the headmaster's office. So I was like, oh, here we go again. I've been called playing penny out the water, saying I'm going to get the cane again. You get corporal punishment in them days. So it was just a part of life. So I walked into the headmaster's office, and this guy's sitting there. But because Clayton had abused me, 4 months previously, I'm seeing this posh, and Clayton talked quite poshly. Yeah, he was posh. He was quite posh. He was well spoken. He wasn't. And of course, so all of a sudden, I've got this guy sitting there asking me that he runs the athletics club, Collingwood, and he would love me to come and run for the club. And I was like, yeah, rightio. It ain't happening, because I didn't trust him at all. He's talking very posh, and I'm thinking, no chance. Absolutely, you got 2 hopes. No chance at all. There's not. So I just said, sorry, I play football, not interested. So I walked off. And then a couple of other times he kept coming back. And my headmaster said to me one day, he said, "Paulie, you're a talent." He said, go and give it a go. And there's a lovely chapter in the book about when I turn up and all these, and I stand about 400 meters away, and I look all the cars turning up. There was BMWs and there was Mercedes, and because they're all posh kids. And I was standing there, and I've got dodgy old trainers on, and I look a proper state, and I'm looking at all these kids, and they're so posh, they got all the latest gear, and I'm like, I'm never going to fit in here. It's not going to happen. So I've turned around to walk off, and Terry Knight ran up to me and said, "Oh, I'm so glad you came down," and he dragged me over, and that's how I got into it. And then and I say in the book that how I soon became a really good athlete, and there was no one at that club that could beat me. I was just talented. I don't know where it came from, but I just had a talent for running. But I still didn't fit in.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and just You talk so fast. I'm just trying to
I'm
keep.
sorry. Yeah, you New Zealanders and Aussies, we talk too fast, or you don't we? I'm sorry.
No. It's just there's gold in them there hills, and I just want to go penning for gold. You know, it's interesting for the audience watching. Paulie mentioned Clayton. It is still Nigel. It's Nigel Clayton, just so you're aware of the same person. But secondly, isn't it interesting how survival kicks in and how we can be triggered? Because the sound of, you know, the coach Terry's voice, the sound of his voice was enough to have you thinking, because of what happened to me, I'm never going to trust a voice like that again. So it's just interesting, audience, isn't it? Just to notice how things like that kick into our hypervigilance. And we know that as survivors, what do we develop really highly, apart from athletic ability, Paulie? We develop a sense of hypervigilance. Who's behind, who's in front, where's the escape route, how quickly can I get from there to the door? So we do this not because we want to do this, team, but because it's part of our survival. We have to be on alert because we don't know what's happening and when. The second thing is, and Paulie, it's something you mentioned a while ago in the beginning of our interview, was some well-meaning, lovely person said, gosh, how could you be so strong? And I just want to talk about this a little. As survivors, we often get labelled, oh, you're so strong. Can I just say to survivors out there, well, yes, but again, it was because we had to be. So we don't feel that is a compliment. Yeah, no. We don't feel that. We did what we had to survive. If that means we became strong and more resilient, yep, we did that. But to be honest, guys, it's not a compliment. And I don't know about you.
It's a safety mechanism. It's a safety mechanism. It's for me. I mean, you've only been talking to me 20 minutes, but sort of, with me, I come across as very confident, and I'm a strong human being in that respect. But a lot of what I am now is because it's traits that I've grown up with. I had to be this brash, in your face. You know, I was born. That's how I was always described. You're born in a china shop, but that's because I didn't trust anybody, and I wouldn't let people close to me. So my only way, my only safety, and that's how I got out of that time of abuse. My only safety mechanism that I had as a teenager and a youngster was my temper. Now I'm not proud of it, and I've still got a temper to this day, but I can control it now. But I couldn't control it then, and within a split second, I would go into a rage. And I wasn't like that before Nigel done what he done to me, but it was. So I became this in your face, very confident. But is that really me? Probably not, to tell you the truth. It's something that I've grown up with, and I've just become used to being. And yeah, it's not me. And my partner, you know, she'll tell you what I'm all about. I'll sit and watch a film, and it's something I can't control. Certain things I can't control my emotions. I'm a very emotional person, so if something comes on the telly and triggers me, that's me. You know, I break down. So for me, the real person, the people that really know me know. I wouldn't know anybody. I've boxed for 30 years, and I was a very successful boxer, but I would never harm anybody, truthfully.
You're raising a good point, because what you did was you took on the role of, and it is a defense, of course, the role of an angry person. What I took on was the role of a caregiver. What our audience watching may have taken on was maybe the role of the perfect child. What another person watching may have taken on is the role of the mediator. So in our families, when we grow up in dysfunction like this and abuse has a seat at the table, which is often the case, Paulie, we take on those roles. You took on that role to survive. And I think it's interesting what you say, because it sounds like, and this is not uncommon to us as well, that putting that mask on or putting that in front of you kept you safe. But as you've just said, it's not actually who you really are at all. But you were in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you fought. That was your defense. That was your post-traumatic stress response. And it's just interesting how well it protected you. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's sad because the people that really do know me, that don't, like Amy knows me, and there's a few people that do know me, and I don't have enemies. You know what I mean? I don't make enemies. You know, I've liked everywhere I go. You know, I trained kids. I boxed for a long time. I trained kids for 10 years, and it was a lovely thing for me to give something back. And it's funny, teenagers that I trained, well, weren't just teenagers, it was from 7 years to 16 years and older, and they came from broken homes, and so I could read a lot of the traits they had. You know, I could read what they were going through, and I became not just their coach, but I became their, even though I was a mentor, but I was their friend. They could tell me things that their parents couldn't tell me, and I would sit and talk to them about everything. Everything. At the end of the session, we'd stretch, and we do 20 minutes of light work, and we'd sit on the mats and we'd stretch everything, and we would talk about everything. And the parents used to say to me, "What is it about you? Our kids have completely changed since they've been with you." You know what I mean? And I just told them the truth. I didn't beat about the bush because of the experience I'd gone through. I didn't want them going through the same experiences. And I just, just say to them, listen. Yeah. There's, I should listen. I'll tell you how it was. If I'd say, look, there's a door. You can go down the park. You can go and be a sheep and follow all the other sheep, and you can be a bum. You can go and drink and take drugs and be a pain in the arse, and you go to prison and get into violence. I said, or you can stay here and become someone. I said, stop being a sheep. Stay here, become somebody. You get more respect for being. And a lot of the kids have been thrown out from school and everything. I mean, some of them became top fighters, top boxers, and lovely people. And the parents would say to me, "Well, what is it about you? Why do they listen to you so much?" And I said, "No, why? Because I tell them the truth. I don't scream and holler and shout at them. I tell them in a firm way, that there's nothing you can't achieve to put your mind to it. So by my mother doing and saying the things she done to me, I wanted to be someone, and my coach, the loveliest man, he was the first person in my life that believed in me. Do you understand? So, and because he was so nice to me, I wanted to please him. I would train like no one else. I would train so hard I would be sick because I wanted to keep winning. And when I won, and I would win, I hated losing anything, and I won top honours in athletics. I was one of the top boys in the country, and I loved it. I loved it when I turned up at meetings and people would point and go, "Oh God, he's the one to beat." You know what I mean? And people would talk to me. They didn't even know me. And I wasn't used to this. I wasn't used to people being nice to me. You know what I mean? So to hand that on to the kids that I trained for all them years, it was just a way. But I'd done all this long before this all came, before the book was released. Would I have released this book had I known the horrors? Yes and no. The trial was horrendous. It was the most horrific thing I've ever had to go through, having been cross-examined. You know what I mean? And would I have brought it out? I think 50-50. Now that Clayton's away forever and he's never going to be able to use anybody ever again, yes, it was worth it. But when I was going through the trial, to be honest,
tell us a little bit about. I just for our audience to understand, Paulie, who began the idea of a trial? Did that come from you? Did the police approach you? How did that happen?
No, the police. A friend of a friend read my book, and her husband was a detective, and he had told you he was investigating the disappearance of a boy. I half knew him. I didn't know him well, but I half knew him. He was a nice enough guy, and he just asked me one day if I could give him the person. I said no. I didn't know who he was. I just knew his name. I hadn't seen him since it happened, and that was that. And it was like karma because 3 or 4 weeks later, I won't go into detail because it's too long-winded, but I stumbled across him. I stumbled on him, and I gave the police his phone number and his name. And within 3 or 4 days of that, I had to go in and make a statement. They said they couldn't nick him and they couldn't question him unless I made a statement for what he had done. So I didn't really want to, but I did. My God rest her soul, my mum, she died last year, bless her. My foster mum, she was adorable. And she said to me, Paulie, I don't know, I never told her, but she said, I knew something had happened to you. And she said, but if, you know, you've got to stop and think that you're not the only one. If he'd done that to you in 1977, I'm telling you now, he's done it to a lot more. So she said, for your own sake, she said, for finally, even though you've never addressed it, she said, do it, please. She said, I want you to. So I did, and I went and made a statement. That was in 2012, 2011.
So the book was out. The book was out.
Yeah, the book was out. So it was 2012.
Yeah.
2012. Was it 2012? Yes, 2012. So sorry, I'll go back to what I said. The book was released in 2011. So I'll tell a lie. Yes, because it was a year after the book was released. So yeah, so so that's when I made the statement, and that's when it all started. And so 2014, 2015, a big investigation. He started looking into him. He was questioned over probably 15 times, because there was 13 victims that they uncovered within the 5 years. Because what the police said to me is, look, we can nick him for what he's done to you, but there's other victims now, so we're going to go with the other victims, and as soon as we got all the victims, we're going to put it in one basket, and we're going to hit him with the whole lot, because of what he did to me in 1977, he would have only got maybe 4 years maximum, which is ludicrous. But back in 1977, that's what they got.
Yeah.
So they wanted to get everybody in the same pot. You know what I mean? So even though I didn't agree with it at the time, I do now. I was just like, I want, this is going on too long. I was in Australia. I don't live in the UK, I live in Australia. So I was backwards and forwards to Australia because my mum was sick, and I had to keep coming back for the police. And, I even came back for a lineup to identify him. And so I was backwards and forwards all the time from Australia to England. And it wasn't very nice at all. So so that's basically how it all came about. And then he didn't get charged until 2000 and trials 2020. So he didn't get charged till early 2020. He was actually charged. So nigh on 6 years of the investigation. The worst thing was they uncovered allegations against him from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Yeah, 4 people had made accusations against this man that he'd abused them, and nothing was done. The police, do you know what I mean? You're just like, how can he honestly believed, because one of the detectives is actually a very good friend of mine now. He's retired from the police, and we're very, very good mates. And he actually said to me, he is so blasé, he is so arrogant in the question. He actually, because he's got away with it for so long, he actually was that arrogant that when he they went through his phones and they found all these different, which tied him in. They found thousands of images of child pornography. They're horrific. This guy was the most, the things he'd done, I thought what he'd done to me was bad, but as he got older, he became more and more depraved in his actions. And I was actually shocked in court what he did and what he was capable of doing. And even though he was under investigation for 5, nearly 6 years, he was still abusing. Even when the police were investigating him, he was still at it. And that's what shocked me in court, was the fact that he was still doing it. And the police knew what he was doing. They knew he was a prolific. Their words, not mine. He is a prolific pedophile. That's their words. I never used them words. They did. They told me he was a monster. But even though they knew, and they never locked him up, never put him in prison. They took 5 years to charge him because they all wanted it in one point. Yet he was still in court. Came out that he was still abusing boys whilst he's being investigated. Do you know what I mean? Just like what went on, you know, and that hurt me more than anything. Because had I been believed, you know, had I been believed, it wouldn't have happened. You know.
Unfortunately, Paulie, you didn't have the power to make anyone believe you, and it suits sometimes people to not believe us as survivors, because it means then they have to look at themselves. They have to look at why these statistics are so big. And I guess the other thing to point out is this: you and I both know, and our survivors watching will as well, for all those brave men that came forward in this trial, can you imagine how many more didn't?
Say that again, sorry.
Can you imagine how many more were abused that didn't come forward?
Well, there's 7 since he's been sentenced, and since he's in prison. There's, I do believe, and I've been told that this is true, because I'll tell you why I know it's true. Because a friend of mine, Alison, who used to live below Gloria, she phoned me one day, not too long ago, and she said, "Paul, are you in the country?" I said, "Yeah, I'm in the UK." So she said, "Listen," she said, "there was a guy, I won't say his name because it's under investigation. He's made a complaint against Gloria, but he lived nearby, and he was 2 years younger than me." And anyway, she said, "He wants to phone you. Can he phone you?" I was like, "Yeah, I haven't spoken to him for like 30 years." So anyway, she gave me his number and I phoned him and I said, "Hello, blah, blah, blah." I said, "You wanted to talk to me?" He said, "Yeah, can we meet up?" And this was about a year ago, I suppose. No, about 9 months ago. I said, "Yes, no problem." So we met at a local park and I bought him a coffee. And this, I didn't recognise him, but he just broke down. I was sitting talking to him on this table in this little cafe, and he broke down and he said, "I've never told a soul." He said, "I've got 2 teenage daughters." He said, "And I've been so depressed since I heard about the court case, because it was all over the national press in England." He said, "And I felt so sorry for him." And I didn't know this person, I hadn't seen him for a long time, but I actually called him and I said, "Listen, mate," I said, "yeah, it is horrendous." I said, "And you will be believed now because he's in prison." I said, "So you must go and speak to Candice was the detective." I said, and I gave him her number and I said, "You must go and talk to her." I mean, but so there's been at least 7 other victims that come forward since he's been convicted, and they know because I had to go to the police station one day and they showed me a load of photos.
Yeah. So
same boys, the same bed, the same chair. There was 28, I do believe, 14 and 14. There was 28 photos of 28 different young boys under 14, all naked. And the detective asked me if I could identify them.
Yep.
And I recognised 2, but I couldn't put a name to them because it was a long time ago. And I said, "Give me these 2 photos, I'll get your name," definitely, because I know lots of people on the manor. Do you know what I mean? But he wouldn't give them to me. He said, "No, we can't." So there's going to be over the next. There's going to be more and more victims. This man was, he was next level. He's up there with all of them.
Well, and we do know as well, unfortunately and sadly, it doesn't surprise us as survivors to hear this, Paulie. But unfortunately, recent stats in New Zealand that one pedophile can have up to 50 victims.
Really?
Yes, it's not unusual because they don't start and stop. They start and they continue. It's not unusual. We've got to take the wool off our eyes and see this clearly. It's a sickness, and But look, I just want to ask you. We've got about 5-10 minutes left. What has helped you? I guess I'm looking for tips or ideas or things that have helped you get through this and come out the wonderful man that you are. Don't get a big head. What has helped you? What would you advise our other beautiful male survivors who could be struggling or just discovering what's happened to them? What would you say?
What would I suggest if people are struggling with it? Obviously for me, it was my son. My son was born when I was 19, 20. So my son became my sole focus. So I was never, ever, ever going to think about Clayton all the time, even though he was affecting me and I didn't realise it, because, you know, I was married to his mother, who was a dear soul. You know, I couldn't sit here and say the marriage failed because of her. The marriage failed because I wasn't capable of loving. That's the truth. I wasn't capable of anybody close to me. I pushed them away. I pushed every single person away, and I'm very lucky that I've got Amy in my life now, because since the trial, and I met Amy during the trial. I've known Amy a long time, don't get me wrong, but during the trial, me and Amy, we became really good friends, and then we became really close. And it's only since the trial is over that I'm able now to put it behind me and think of myself for a change. You know what I mean? So I'm lucky, but my son was my focus, so that saved me, if I say the truth, because I could have gone either way. I was on a crossroads at that point. I could have gone either way, and to be honest with you, sport. Forget, you don't need drugs, you don't need alcohol, you don't. Sport was, for me, that was my saviour as well. My son, and definitely sport. I carried on with athletics. I was a very keen boxer. I boxed at a good standard, you know, and yeah, sport definitely 1,000,000%. And just get outdoors. Don't sit and look at four walls. You know, if you're a victim like all of us, you know, and we're all survivors of this thing. You know, just keep busy. You know, surround yourself with decent people. Don't sit and look at four walls, because it will get you down. The great outdoors is the best, and especially, you know, it's not just like you're in New Zealand, I'm in London at the moment, you know, but in every part of the world, you know, get out and about. Don't sit indoors, and you know, there are decent people in the world, you know, and make you know, don't sit and dwell, because if you do, it will destroy it. It nearly destroyed me, trust me. You know what I mean? It did, and I'm not going to say it didn't. During the investigation, I was in a terrible state, and I'm not going to say I weren't. And without Survivors UK, I will always big them up, and my third book is going to be completely dedicated to them, and every penny that raises is going to them, because they work purely on charity. And so, yeah, and definitely get the counselling. Million. I shunned it. No, I don't need counselling. I'm too strong. That's me. Ball in a giant shop. Don't need nothing. Don't need no one's help. But you know, something I did. And it's only the fact that when I broke down and I was really in a bad way, I just couldn't focus on anything. I was like a bear with a sore head. I'd cry all the time. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was terrible nightmares. So yeah, that's my advice to them: is, you know, seek the help, go and get it. You know what I mean? There are organisations all over every country in the world that, you know, and talk about it. And my man, one thing he said to me, Paulie, every time I left the meeting, he used to say to me, he'd give me shake my hand, and he'd say, always remember, this wasn't your fault, because all victims, we all blame ourselves. I did. I always, because he told me it was my fault, and he made it was all my fault, and it's not our fault. So that's my advice. Do not sit indoors, get out.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I love what you're saying. And, you know, that whole thing, and you and I talked about it earlier, it wasn't your fault. The thing is, as children, we can't afford to think adults are wrong, because we need to survive, and we need to be fed. We need to be able to sleep. We need to feel as safe as possible. If that's not at home, we leave home. We keep out of home as much as possible. But the thing is, as children, we are so dependent, and it should be this way, by the way, guys. We're so dependent on the adults around us that, of course, if anything bad happens, we have to assume it's us, because we don't have the luxury of thinking that person deliberately tried to. So for the rest of our lives, that will be a challenge. So thank you for raising that. Guys, as we're going into close, I'm just going to ask Paulie if there's any last words before I do a closeout. Any final words of wisdom, Paulie?
Any words of wisdom? What can I say that I haven't already said, really? No, you know, saying, if people are watching this and they've never had the courage to come forward, and I've said this in my other interviews, if you're watching this and you know you've been abused and it is affecting your life, don't sit and just, because it will destroy you. If you don't get it dealt with as soon as possible, You know, even if it doesn't go your way, you're still brought it to the attention, and the person that's done it is going to be questioned. You know what I mean? And but 8 out of 10 now, you do get the result. You know, I didn't believe it, but you do. So don't sit and suffer, because you get older and it will destroy you. I wasn't capable of showing love or affection. Anybody that close to me, I pushed them away. I'm only capable now because it's all done, and I managed. And during it, I didn't want to do it, but I'm glad I did, because now life is so much better. So yeah, don't sit and dwell. You know what I mean? Life's for living. Crack on, get it up, get it out, and then you can start living. Because you will take it to your grave if you don't, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
You know?
No, thanks, Paulie. Hey guys, so wow, how amazing is that, you know, to have gone through what Paulie did and come out the amazing person he is today. How grateful are we that he was able to share what happened to him with us. So I'm sure you will have got some great things out of that. I certainly did. It's quite riveting, isn't it, listening to him? But stay there, Paulie. In the meantime, just as I'm saying goodbye to you, fabulous audience, just know you're always seen, you're always believed, and I stand beside you. Take care till next time.